Hello, this is Dawn here with another essential conversation. Today we're going to talk about trust, trauma, truth, and terror. So trust, trauma, truth, and terror. And this is, it's a little context. I've been working on my Holy Terror book again. Those of you who follow me know I've been working on this since 2004, I believe, is when I started trying to write down some of my experience pre 9/11 and process that, and here it is, 2016, which is what how many years is that? That's 12 years later. And so to date, we've broken the record. This has taken me longer than it took me to share Cultivating Essence, which was really about getting prepared in my heart to share that message with the world. It was already in the form that I released it in. And with this book, Holy Terror, which is about soul restoration, the inner terrorist, and the healing of humanity, it's just a lot for me to try to get on the page and to articulate. We're coming up on the 15th anniversary of 9/11, and so I believe I will probably release at least the introduction to the book. And I am still seeking a representation from an agent or a really good publisher. I just haven't found the right partner, but a really good publisher with an editor who can help me get that into shape and share that with the world. What that book is, for those of you who are new to me, is the Friday before September 11th, I was in Atlanta and had a very unexpected encounter with an individual that was very disturbing, shook my world. No words were exchanged, but something most definitely happened, and I shared that, and I later, 3 days later, found out from the TV screen when we were all seeing those disturbing images that individual was Muhammad Atta, who is reported to have flown one of the planes into the Twin Towers. So I share that story and then talk a little bit about my perspective on this idea of terror and the inner terrorist, and what I see as a pathway to the healing of humanity. So that's what that book is all about. It's sort of big, and it's also very personal, of course. And so I will continue to work on that. And that is, I've been, revisiting that a bit here and there, sporadically, I have to say. But that's where today's topic is what it's informed by, partially. But there's a larger picture too. It's not just about that kind of terror in our lives, or even just the inner terrorist. So I want to begin with trust. So many of us, I think human nature in general, trust is natural. It's a natural state. In nature, you see trust reflected everywhere, right? There can be these violent storms that destroy everything, and somehow life finds a way. And there is a inherent trust, I think, in individuals and people and in nature, and it's we can see that. So today, let's just start off with this. Today, my invitation to you is to look for ways that are examples of how you can indeed trust life. So what happens to many of us, though, is, of course, we have these early traumatic events, which brings us to trauma, or chaos in the world at large, or in our individual family unit for many of us, and that is disruptive, and it makes us question, particularly from our mind and the egoic portion of our personality. First of all, it makes us question how safe we are, and so right at the core, we see things and we don't understand what's happening in our minds, and sometimes even in our hearts are hurt by these events that are inexplicable, and usually this happens when we're fairly young in some form or fashion, in some cases in a very dramatic way, and a way that causes a deep break or fragmentation, is what happened with me, or other times it can be a series of things that just chip away at our confidence, our faith, our assurance that all is well. And if we're lucky, then that is bolstered by a deep faith or by a solid loving family unit. But in some cases, even when that is there, as it was in my case, the events that occur, these tragedies, these traumas, the drama of life, the chaos, the unpredictable nature of life, all of that really begins to shake us. And when we're shaken to our core, we can begin to lose that trust in life. It's a choice, but it's one that I believe many of us make without understanding what we're doing, and it happens slowly over time for many of us. So, trust in life, again, I believe that is a natural state, and as I do also believe faith is foundation. And faith and trust, by the way, go hand in hand here. So I've talked about faith in other places, so I won't go too deeply there into that topic. But just know when I say the word faith and when I'm talking about trust in life, I am not talking about some system that prescribes what that looks like. And I am certainly not talking about an external faith and trust. I'm talking about an inherent quality that we have. We just have to look for it within, and we are given the opportunity to choose that. So the trust, we begin to lose our natural trust in life, and if we believed it in the first place, we sometimes begin to doubt. There's a seed of doubt around this idea that life is working in our favor, around the idea that this is a loving universe and that we are held in an infinite grace, that God or the universe or spirit or life itself is a force for good and growth. And we begin to shift our perspective because we start seeing these traumas or these other events, and we give them power as we focus on them, and we feel, or we try to fight against them. So there's that flight or fight syndrome that happens when these things crop up that shift our world in a moment, turn it on its head. And when, like, for somebody, for example, somebody you love lashes out at you as a child, and you don't understand that, and it breaks your heart, yes, but it also begins to, if we're not really attuned, it begins to subtly shift our focus, and we begin to focus on those disappointing or difficult experiences, or those times when our hearts were so tender, and we begin to protect. And anytime we begin to defend or protect, that again, this relates to the shame and blame that I talked about in the last recording, but that creates conditions for us to create a false self, or a false, a skewed perspective on life itself, on who we are. And again, we lose sight of the context of this loving, beautiful, gracious universe, and this beautiful love and light and life that is at our core. And we begin to separate ourselves. We put layers between that and who we think we are. And we begin to buy into this belief that this world is not safe, that people are not trustworthy, that we're all on our own, that we're going to have to make this work ourselves. And so one of two paths usually unfolds. The first path is quite common in Western society, and that is, by God, I'm going to do this myself. And watch this world. I'll prove what I can do, and I'll create my own little protected universe, and here's how it's going to work. ABC, blah, blah, blah. And then many of us just get right down to implementing that plan. And when we come up against obstacles, we just push right through, and we keep going. And I've walked that road, and I'll save that for another recording, but that ultimately leaves us in a place where we come to see that is working against the laws of the universe and life itself. It's pride, it's pride, and it's a lack of trust and surrender in the positive sense. Not surrender as in give up your action and your choice, but acceptance, non-attachment, and love, which is who we are. So that's one path, is to just push right through and prove to the world and completely, take the reins, and I'll do it. The second path that some of us walk down is one of essentially giving up our sovereignty, giving up our power, saying, never mind, I'll settle, I'll do it this way, because we think we have a false view. Again, our perspective has become skewed because we have focused on whatever has arisen that has shaken our trust in life, and we begin to give that more belief than we do the initial trust that we had. So many of us at that point begin a pattern of giving up or giving out, exhaustion, or just throwing our hands up and say, never mind, I don't get it. I don't know how to do this. Or giving our power over to something or someone else. I have at points walked down this path too. There was a time in my life when I saw what was happening. My heart was broken. I didn't think I would survive it. And it was easier for me to play a role that other people seemed to be casting upon me, which was, you're acting crazy. And you are crazy, and you are not making it, and you need help, and blah, blah, blah. And I knew full well that what was happening was beautiful and a gift to me, and it was a spiritual awakening. There were a lot of complicating factors, and yes, I was under a tremendous amount of stress, internal primarily, but also external. And it was easier for me to play that role of crazy and just go along with it. Now, when I did that, I thought that it would lead me, if I did this one last thing, if I let life have this one last thing, this was my view of it at the time, then I was certain that finally I could be at rest and trust again. And when we do that, though, when we just give up our own individual power to choose, our own sovereignty, and essentially just lay it all down, but in a way that, not in a positive, but lay it all down in a way that is self-sacrificing and not honoring of our own inner truth, our own knowing, our soul's truth. When we sacrifice that, then we have essentially voted against life, because we're just demonstrating our lack of trust that in ourselves and in life working through us, in the power of God moving through us. And that does not lead to a state of greater well-being or trust. In fact, it does the opposite. And I'm here to tell you that it takes a long time to recover from that sort of a choice, because we know deep inside that we have made a move that is against our own heart and soul, and it can do grave injury to ourselves. So those two paths both do not lead where we think that they will lead. And again, they're both born out of this skewed perspective that we can no longer trust in life. So I'm hoping that you can relate this to something in your life where this has happened and see that right now, in this day, you have the opportunity to turn your eyes back toward life and toward a deeper trust in life, and really go within and find your own soul's truth and knowing. And in that place, that beautiful protected sanctuary within us, we know the truth. And we know that what we're seeing at the moment, or what we have seen in the past in terms of, these traumatic situations, and this pertains also to terror, externalized terror in our world, but also the terror and the fear that runs through us, and feeling that we can't trust ourselves. When we can see that, and we can see that that is not true. That is not the truth of who we are. Feel it. So really practice that. You may, if you haven't been on a spiritual path, you may not, this may sound like, what? That doesn't make any sense, and that's not true. Just take some time every day to be present to yourself. Let all the thoughts fall away, and just be present. Put your hand on your heart and feel, and ask to be shown. Ask to be shown the ways that you can trust in that deeper, truer, higher part of you that does know the truth, and that sees rightly, and ask to be restored to that place. And then in every day, as you're making choices, ask yourself, is this choice aligned with a trust in life? Now, what I'm not saying here is to indiscriminately put your faith and trust in externalized, in people, situations, systems, other people. I think it is important to have a state of trust with those, but what I am saying here is that we begin and with a trust in spirit, in moving through life, and in our own soul's knowing. Those two things work together, because we belong to God in my view of it, and we are pure and whole and beautiful beings who represent the fact and the truth that that God is trustworthy, and that this place where we find ourselves and the life all around us is something that will hold us. So I hope that some of that makes sense. So that is a little bit on trust and then the trauma that leads us away from that trust. So let me talk a little bit about truth and terror. So let's start with the terror, right? Many of us have an internal thread of fear and terror about life itself, about some of us in a very conscious way early on, had that terror in terms of simply being in this place, and our souls remembered who we were, and there was something that we needed to reconcile there in terms of really seeing ourselves fully and understanding the beauty of who we were created to be, and also really tapping into that eternal self that and all we have brought here to this place in time. And that journey can unfold very differently for different people, and it's really beautiful. That's really beautiful. So, but we come up against this fear that seems to be running through us, and for many of us, it's a nameless, faceless terror, and it can feel, it can feel insurmountable. It can feel hopeless. It can feel as if we can never escape its grip. And it does feel like a monster, I call it the terror bear. And I talk about that in Holy Terror, a little bit about what this was like for me. I think I had fairly extreme sense of that from the time I was a very small child. And it really ran through every experience that I had for decades, three plus decades of my life. And when I became aware of it, even then, so I'm 51 right now, going on 52 soon, and I'm still, there can be days where it takes, even though I'm super aware of that within myself, it can take me a few minutes, sometimes a few hours, and sometimes in the worst situations a day or so. Hasn't happened for a while, and I hope it doesn't again, but that where to recognize that current that is still running through me, that is shifting me and pulling me away from my truth. And when I say my truth, I mean the thing that is inextricable from me, my essential truth that is in my soul's truth and radiance. And that is indestructible. It cannot be taken from me. And yet, time and time again, even with my awareness, I'm pulled away from it by this current of fear and terror that's running within me. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time here talking about where that comes from and what we do about it. I hope to address some of that in my book. But what I would like to say is that it's the same sort of situation as what I talked about with trust and trauma, where what happens over time is we turn our attention to the terror we see, the terror we feel. We may not speak about it, but we think a lot about it, and we know it's there. And when we try not to think about it by distracting ourselves essentially with all the to-dos and the great things that we're doing in the world, or by roles and identifying with roles, or identifying with a particular situation or opportunity, and really kind of dividing that and keeping it compartmentalized in such a way that we build these barriers, and again, that's working against ourselves, against our true nature. It is blocking the flow of life. And when we do that, not only does that remove us from that truth and, essentially keep us in the dark, it also opens us up to outside influence, and it actually does the opposite of what we think it's doing. So we think we are protecting ourselves from that internal state of terror, or when it's an external terror, we're trying to work against or keep ourselves protected from. We begin to build barriers to the love we are and to the truth, and we create a false way of being, and a false way of seeing the world, a false way of being in the world. And we certainly are not free. We may tell ourselves we are free, but essentially what we have done is try to create a world that is separate from others, and often from ourselves. We just don't see that at first. And this is mirrored in a variety of ways in our individual lives, in groups with which we are affiliated, in political systems, in our country, in our collaborations and alliances, where we are, again, trying to say, this is what we stand for, this is our world, and that's not allowed in our world, and we are not like them, and that is not anything. So it comes from a place of, it's interesting how that unfolds, and I'm not sure I'm using the correct words here, but bear with me for a second. So it's interesting how that unfolds, right? Because when we go down that path and begin to, it feels like a very positive thing, right? We are making our world a better place. We are creating a life that is based on love. But when we do that by shutting off out everything else, and by beginning from a place of saying, I am not that, and essentially removing ourselves from that and saying, and not caring. And in my view, there's been a lot of this in the last 15 years, not directly and not exclusively related to the events of 9/11, but, we have had boom, 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 boom in our world, terror attack after terror attack, and retaliation after retaliation, and, mass shootings, and other, genocide and other events occurring all around the world on the large scale, but also on the small scale. Within our cities, there have been, lots of in the United States, there have been lots of disruptions of violence and pitting of one group against another, and this false sense that we must choose one or the other, be in this camp or that camp. And this has been going on, of course, for eons or centuries, for as long as humanity has existed. And I don't have all the answers at all, and want to make that super clear. I'm on the way with this, and that's, when I'm making these recordings, that's kind of where I am. I'm just on the way with it. I'm just sharing the perspective that I have now, and I'm usually in the middle of it. Okay, I'm definitely not an expert here. However, I do feel strongly that it's important for us to have these conversations, and so that's why I'm making these audios. So the truth and terror is actually a finer line than we think it is, right? We see it as very black and white. You're either a terrorist or you stand for truth and goodness. And the truth that I have come to is that I must find a way to love that part of me that is filled with rage, and that rage is born out of that streak of terror, that absolute sense of falling, like there is no bottom, and like there is no way out of this box of life, or there is no way to find my footing or to grasp onto anything. And I believe that's why I have been given certain experiences in my life of various experiences of feeling that, whether it was when I was a small child and in situations that were extremely painful and difficult for me, or whether it was when I was feeling just like as if I didn't belong to this world, or whether it was when entire groups, which I loved, were shutting me out and slamming the doors in my face, and I felt completely alone, or whether it was when I sat in that restaurant and could not fathom what was happening, but stared into the eyes of Muhammad Atta and was shaken to my core. So all of those, I believe, have been gifts for me to be able to understand that it was a gift for me to be able to see what was within me and that needed to be healed. And I believe that individual healing and the healing that can take place in the context of relationships and groups is the seed of the healing of humanity. And I do see the possibility and the hope that we can live in seriously a whole new world, and that can be such a beautiful blessing for us all. And it begins with the willingness to touch that terror that I have come to call a holy terror. Now, I want to just speak really quickly to that term, holy terror, because I've thought a lot about that. There is a sense that the things that show up in our world, in our lives, that seem to be corrupting us, need to be rooted out. need to be absolutely squashed. And clearly, in terms of external terror events, they're, that's a difficult and complex topic, and I am not going to get into the political discussion here, but on an individual basis, when we experience that terror within us, our instinct can say, shut it down, that's not true, turn it off, be done with it, go on. But what happens if we need to go a little deeper? We need to see it, we need to, as Rumi says, welcome all into the guest house. This is where trust comes in. We've got to trust that our soul is solid, that it is, and this is, I believe, also the root of some of that inner terror, that where it goes really askew, and people do open themselves up to being influenced by others with a malicious agenda, or they also they're so in such a compromised state that they're just not thinking clearly, and they've shut themselves off from their own source of light and love, to the extent that they are just in a completely compromised state and lose their empathy, ability to essentially be human. Okay, so sorry, I got distracted there with that thread. When we come up against that terror, and our tendency is, and our instinct is to shut it down, and what I'm suggesting here is that we see it, we become aware of it, and we ask questions from our heart and soul, not our mind, but we ask it questions. What are you here to show me? What are you here to teach me? One way to do that is through dialogue journaling. Give the terror a voice. Let it speak on paper. And it's very helpful when dealing with these sorts of things, particularly if it's a persistent issue, as it is for many of us, to get some assistance with that, whether that is through counseling or a trusted advisor, certainly through prayer and meditation. So give yourself the space to see the terror and to ask it what it's here to show you, or what it needs. Because what that is it's your soul, and it's your heart and soul crying out for something, and perhaps it is also a representation of a belief system that's no longer serving you, and it can be many other things. And so what happens again is, like, as I talked about, I believe in the shame audio, it's like this stuff all gets magnetized to us, and then it becomes this big, gloppy ball of stuff that is very difficult to sort out, because it's terror upon terror upon terror that we've stuffed away, and we keep trying to push it down and push it down and push it down. And we all know what happens when we do that. There comes a point when there's no more room, and when you have literally closed, you've crammed yourself so full of all of that you're not addressing, that you're not dealing with, and pretending it's not there, that there is no room for you, or you can't locate the truth within you. And so my hope and desire from this conversation for all of us is that we seek truth within us first, and trusting that will be revealed through us by Spirit, by all that is, by love. So I would love to share with you the 8 sacred movements to turn terror to truth. That will be in the Holy Terror book, and I'll be sharing something around that, I hope, somewhere close to September 11th. So be sure to follow me on Facebook. It's author Dawn Richerson is my page where I probably would share that. On YouTube, it's Dawn Richerson, DAWNRICHERSON, if you want to follow me there, or and then here, of course. So much love to you, and please know today, wherever you are, that there is truth within you and healing, and you are held in an infinite grace, and this is a life in which you can trust. Life is working in your favor, and you are beautiful, and you are light, and you are life, and you are love.